If you're somebody in the nerd and online space, you probably saw the latest little beef between the Birdman and Asmongold, as the Birdman has been going on a kind of crusade fighting off against the grifters on the internet, which, fair, there are a lot of them. But the question will be, do you think Asmongold belongs in this section? And when it comes down to their argument based upon the debate about IQ. And let's go through point by point each of their sides and let's see who's correct.
In one of the most ironic social media posts of all time, Asmongold makes the claim, in response to Mehdi Hassan, that the average IQ in Somalia is 68, and that this claim isn't racist, but a fact. What makes this post ironic is the very last bit, where Zach claims Hassan's tweet is an attempt to push a narrative. Well, not only is this Asmongold's attempt to push a narrative, but the claim itself that African people have low IQs is also an attempt to push a narrative. That number typically traces back to the work of Richard Lynn. This guy, a literal, self-described scientific racist. This man was part of a secret eugenics conference where, and I'm not joking, there were people favorably arguing in favor of pedophilia.
So that was Birdman's opening statement in relation to this tweet, which comes around the idea again of IQ being determination in relation to culture. That's ultimately what this is about. What was Zach's response?
Zach claims Hassan's tweet is an attempt to push a narrative.
It absolutely is trying to push a narrative. It's trying to push the false narrative that every culture and every group of people has an identical IQ. This is not true. Everybody knows this isn't true. You take 3 seconds and you look at the world and you know it isn't true.
Well, not only is this Asmongold's attempt to push a narrative, but
yes,
the claim itself that African people have low IQs is also an attempt to push a narrative.
Yes.
That number typically traces back to the...
There's also a lot of other components to why people have low IQ, and it's not necessarily race. I'm sure that race is a component, but I would say it's probably like a 4th or 5th level component. So the big reason is you've got the big 3, right? 2 of them are like kind of harder to say, and the last one is like a little bit harder. It's a little bit more obvious. Inbreeding is number 1. Do you think that inbreeding is going to lower people's IQ or not? Do you think that a society full of people that are inbreeding are going to have low IQs? Is it going to fuck up people's brains? Absolutely it is. You also have the amount of nutrition. You have food. So if you take people that are inbred, that have no food, you are going to have people that have extremely low IQs. This is just obvious. And the problem is that some people want to pretend like this isn't the case, but it's very evident that it is because your brain isn't getting the nutrients that it needs. Now, I think that again, if you really even assign all of that and you remove all of that, very clearly there probably are some degree of racial differences, but the main factors are inbreeding and nutrition. That's a massive fucking factor. And also, if you look at the way that people from Somalia have integrated into British culture, how they've integrated into American culture, how they've come from, let's say, Japan, you will see one common variable every single time. It's that these people are total drains on the society. They are massively problematic. They're scamming. They steal things. They do not integrate. And at the end of the day, they are a negative for the societies that they come to. So why would you bring in all these people that have such a high rate of there being a negative outcome? Why would you ever do that? It's stupid. It has, like, if you just take a step back, are you keeping your country safe? Are you keeping your people safe when you allow immigration from a country that has a massive inbreeding? Do you want to know what the percentage of women who are victims of female genital mutilation are in Somalia? 99%. I'm not kidding. If you look up the World Health Organization, and they have a study on this, 99% of women in Somalia are victims of female genital mutilation. I don't want to import that culture into my country. I don't want to take the risk that I'm importing that culture into my country. I don't want them here.
So to sum up the 2 points being made, Birdman is arguing that when you use race as a component to any kind of analysis, specifically with a preconceived or confirmation bias that an inherent race or race of people is inferior to you, in a scientific study, it muddies or poisons the well. And what Zach is saying is race is a factor, but not a big factor, but it has to be attributed to the research, and claiming that someone is racist and therefore throwing out the research makes it moot is what his argument is. And that when it comes to superior inferior cultures, as he phrases it, that there is a histrionics of certain cultures and groups in not even just America, but across the world. We all know this. There's definitely rich and dark histories from every country and society. The point I think a lot of people like the Birdman would say is that we don't usually attribute that to white cultures. We usually talk about, non-white cultures in relation to the evils, the taboos, whatever negative thing you want to say about a culture. It usually is highlighted in non-white cultures compared to white cultures, because if you look at histrionics of white society from everywhere in Europe, there are just as much terrible things that have been done in European history in comparison to African history, Indian history, South Asian history, you name it. Every culture has its warts. There's not the problem here. The problem is that when you inherently lead a research or a scientific study with the idea that a race part is the biggest reason for the distinction, that is inherently racist. Now, To summarize their opening statements, I believe that they're both coming at it from two different angles and are talking past each other. Because Birdman is specifically talking about the idea that the person who did the study being racist makes the study invalid, therefore you can't really use their points, their data sets, etc., because it's not a objective study, which he can prove, and he shall. Let's see it.
Sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, Lin's argument was that a continent that consists of about 50 countries all had a similar very low IQ. The obvious problem with this argument is that Africa is huge and there are over 1 billion people with over 1,000 different ethnic groups. Nigeria alone has more than 200 ethnic groups, and that's a single country. Do you think Lin tested every ethnic group in Nigeria, let alone the rest of the continent? Yeah, me neither.
Now, this is an objective criticism of a study where someone is trying to attribute a cultural standard, but ignores the fact that not everyone within the study is culturally the same. The sheer fact of the amount of countries in Africa shows that one can never use a sweeping judgment or a sweeping study to make a condemnation or a judgment about Africa as a continent and all the societies within it. This is an objective fact.
A white supremacist outlet that is currently...
See, he's trying to poison the well by saying that things are pseudoscientific, saying they're white supremacist, etc. You're not actually attacking the argument. You're not actually attacking anything that's being said. You are assigning negative variables and negative attributes to it, and then hoping that people, because of those negative variables and attributes that you're assigning to it, will assume that it's wrong because they're not supposed to agree with things that have these attributes. That's what he's doing. It's dishonest.
Maintained by the hilariously named Human Diversity Foundation.
Yes, because there's diversity between humans. That's correct.
Far-right white nationalist company.
Again, none of this has anything to do with whether this is a good or an accurate thing at all. This is more, again, and again, I want to take a step back. It's environmental, it's educational. There is also the factor of inbreeding, which is massive. All of these things have nothing to do with race, and they're still all factors for IQ. So what's happening is that you just have a person who's throwing a bunch of buzzwords at it to hopefully get people to disagree with what's being said. You're trying to shut down conversation, and you have to keep in mind, let's go back and talk about that eugenics conference that was banned. The reason why these things are banned is because research into this topic isn't allowed. You have to keep in mind that the father that invented DNA, or not invented, excuse me, discovered DNA, was effectively had his entire career destroyed because he said that there's a chance that there could be a racial basis for where IQ is coming from. And so the reason why there isn't a lot of research or information in this is because there is a wrong answer. And it's basically politicized science that has been effectively co-opted by activists that will not let people have a conversation about this topic at all.
Now, it's very ironic to hear what Zach just said, because he literally is doing the same thing he accused the Birdman of doing when it comes to poisoning the well. And the argument that science has become politicized is not something that has occurred on the left exclusively. The right has been doing it for the last 5 years, ever since COVID. And the point being is that science and research can be critiqued. That's how science works. The foundation of the scientific method is to question and challenge. But the point being made here is that the Birdman is saying that the person who's doing the research is doing it in bad faith, therefore you cannot trust the research itself. And while he brings up in his own video that other people of the scientific community challenged his very findings and found it to be false. But what Asmongold is doing here is underlying the fact that he's doing the very same thing he claimed Birdman and others like him, or even Destiny, will do, is that they will poison the well, quote unquote, or they will try to say this is pseudoscience, the person has biases, racist, etc. Therefore, we can't take their study seriously. But the fact is that biases exist in all forms, not necessarily just race, but bias exists. Confirmation bias is a real thing. The fact of the matter is, Asmongold, if you want to claim that someone is doing something in bad faith, you can't turn around and do the very same thing.
Anyway, the important part is other psychologists went back and actually checked Lin's work. Wichartz, Dolan, and von der Maas published a systematic review in the journal Intelligence, looking at IQ data from sub-Saharan African samples. What they found was that because African countries are developing countries, they hadn't experienced the variables that caused the Flynn effect, such as improvements to nutrition, healthcare, and even toys. In other words, the environment is the most relevant variable in determining one's IQ score, not genetics.
And this will be something that is provable even by Asmon's own admission, that your environment is a heavy factor in your development, including your intelligence. That's why the whole object of nature versus nurture exists within the psychological community. And let's hear something that Asmon's going to say in relation to this point.
All had a similar very low IQ.
Okay. All of the European countries have similar IQs. All of the Asian countries have similar IQs. This tracks.
This is why you guys come to me. As the Autistic Review, let me showcase what he means by this point. And let's highlight that's a fact, that the IQs of people within Asian nations, European nations, even African nations are similar along the lines. But what is being forgotten, is what the Birdman said, is that the environments of these continents. And if you look deeper into every bit of countries within Africa that show a higher number in comparison to the ones that have a lower number, you will directly see a correlation when it comes to industrialization and progress when it comes to being a third world versus a first world country. The more that your society has advances in a culture, be it in technology, healthcare, and among other factors of infrastructure, you will see a rise in IQ scores because of being more effectively tested. No one's going to be doing levels of schoolwork that we do in the developed countries in relation to an underdeveloped country. So the correlation that Asmongold is referring to is a correct correlation in the fact that those around each other will have similar scores, but he is neglecting the fact that this is completely due to the environments which we're talking about. A third world country will not be as sophisticated as a first world country, therefore the IQ scores will vary.
Let's rewind for a second because I mentioned something that you all may not be familiar with: the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect is the observed rise in IQ scores over time. Basically, if you gave an average person from 1901 a modern IQ test, they would score dramatically lower than the people of today. Not because they were genetically predisposed to being less intelligent, but because IQ tests measure certain types of abstract reasoning, pattern recognition, and problem solving that modern societies train us in constantly.
Exactly. As the point being stated, you can't always measure something in a vacuum when it comes to race and culture. You have to look at the time periods, and you got to look at those who are actually gathering the information. Now, this is a great point to make, that in terms of modern society, you'll say people are smarter or dumber than given time periods because there was different mentalities, different importances back then. Let's see what Asmongold has to say for this.
It's true. So in general, you are going to have a ceiling and a floor of IQ. Like, for example, if somebody's really, really naturally smart, if they are not well educated and they're not, basically, they don't have good, what do you call it? They don't have good, environment, or they don't have good nutrition, excuse me. And for whatever reason, they don't have these options. Well, what ends up happening is that, yeah, they're not going to be as smart as they could be, but their floor is higher than somebody else's. So it's the same as anything else. There's a variation of it, but that variation doesn't go from 100 to 0. There is a natural limitation that each person has. And if you really think that you can train two random people and one of them can just randomly be Einstein just because you educate them in the right way, you're just delusional. You're obviously delusional. Every single other element of humanity is measured in this way. So, for example, there are people who are shorter because they have lower, amounts of food that they're eating, but it's not like people that have an adequate amount of food are always 7 feet tall either. There is a genetic variation, but inside of that genetic variation, there is a ceiling and a floor for each individual person. There are people that are just stupid. And there's a problem, is that a lot of people inside of Western society are terrified of the idea that people are not equal. But they're not. And we all know this. Everybody knows this. If you've gone to a public school, you would know this. There are a lot of people that are just born with less talent points than others. They're stupid. They're dumb. And there's nothing that you're going to be able to do. You're not going to be able to teach them something. Maybe you can make it a little bit better, but you're never going to teach a lot of these people to be rocket scientists. It's just never going to happen. It's a delusion, but people don't want to talk about that because they're worried that it could be considered or seen as eugenics.
Now let's unpack that, because eugenics is a term that's been thrown around a lot in the last year, so especially with the whole Sydney Sweeney drama. But the term about eugenics refers to the study or practice of improving the genetic quality of the human population through selective breeding, genetic engineering, or other means. The point that Asmongold is trying to make here is that people don't want to concede the idea that some people are inherently not born equal. That, despite what they say in the Bible, what they say in the preamble, despite what you hear, all men are, quote, created equal, which is factually not true. As he brings up, people are tall, people are short, people have natural affinities for certain studies, math, science, etc. We are not born completely equal. That is fair. We don't all have the same skill sets or talents. There's a reason that so many people can play in certain sports, compete at the Olympics, etc. You are born with natural advantages and disadvantages based on genetics. And that's not an uncomfortable truth. I think what tends to follow this ideology is that because there are inherent flaws or shortcomings in some people, they don't want that to be passed on down because they don't understand how it can be spread. But it really comes down to randomness and variance. Yes, there's a level of control you have in terms of like getting with someone with certain good genes, getting with someone who's tall, muscular, who has good physical or genetic dispositions that you want to add onto your family or your lineage. But the difference being when it comes to eugenics and the negative is people want to use that as a way of rooting out people, wanting to get rid of them from our society and therefore cleanse the gene pool. And that's where you run into the problem. I don't think, Asmon, the problem is that people want to not talk about eugenics, not talk about the genetic dispositions of people. What people are trying to get you to understand is that people will take the good faith aspect of something and turn it on a negative. You speak about that all the time. You're saying that people tend to take the worst take of somebody because of a background or a tweet or whatever their history is and disregard any potential contribution they have to society. What I'm telling you is that people will take something that is good or neutral with science in general and take it to a negative to push an agenda, which is what you're kind of doing yourself by commenting on the idea that eugenics is the reason people don't want to talk about it.
James Flynn, the political scientist who documented this pattern, showed that IQ scores increased roughly 3 points per decade in many countries throughout the 20th century. So, if IQ were purely genetic and fixed, that kind of rapid change would be impossible. Evolution does not move that fast. Your great-grandparents were not biologically inferior to you. They just lived in a world with less formal education, less exposure to abstract symbols, less complex media, and different cognitive demands. Which means IQ scores are sensitive to the environment and improve when the environment improves.
Now, as you can see, we have two different scientists, two different studies, one built off the other, essentially, and trying to combat the data points in the notion that the first one concluded. This is how science works. It has worked for hundreds of years. You take what has been already discovered or already been experimented on and recreate it and retest it to see if it holds weight. Let's see what Asmon has to say after, again, given data from another scientist for the exact same topic.
I think there's a lot of reasons why that happens, and one of the reasons is a eugenic reason. Whenever you have dumb people that are really stupid, the probability is that they're not going to reproduce. So the reason why is that those dumb people usually make bad decisions. Those bad decisions get them put in jail, and you can't have a kid whenever you're in jail. So that's what happens, is that a lot of dumb people wrong. Well, of course, it's obvious that's true. Is that a lot of the dumbest people are going to get removed from the gene pool, right? What about idiocracy? I love how people are saying the argument against me is it's a movie. The argument against what I'm saying is a movie? What do you mean? No, it's obvious this is true. You're going to have the lowest, dumbest people that, like, I'm not talking about, see, like, this is what people don't understand. You're thinking I'm talking about people with like a 90 or an 80 IQ. I'm not. I'm talking about people with a 60 or a 70 IQ. This is a totally different wavelength. And those people are probably not reproducing because a lot of those, especially the majority of those people with that low of intelligence are men. Those men are getting put in jail. That's it.
So if we accept the premise of what he's saying, that, you know, those who are non-desirable are just naturally weeded out as a result of their own actions or inability to maintain themselves due to the lack of IQ, then wouldn't that mean that in the same breath that over generations of time, these men and women and all those people who have the low IQ would have been weeded out over the course of time? Because we do have this thing about progression and industrialization. We can have a timeline of events. So the fact that Birdman highlights that the study that shows that there's not a giant rapid jump, like the idea that in just 50 or 60 years that you would have radical differences is not unheard of. It's actually more common than not, because think about it, for every, so he said, decade, you go through about 3 different jumps in IQ points. That means over the course of 50 years, That's 15 IQ points. If they were all 60, 70, they would be 95 by now. But that's not the case, because we know for a fact, as said earlier, their environment has not fundamentally changed in Africa in the last 60 years.
Well, they were shorter too. Another component to this is that it's height. Like, people in general over the years have become taller. And I think the reason why is the same thing. Like, this isn't even an argument against what I was saying. I think everybody knows this.
Less exposure to abstract symbols, less complex media, and different cognitive demands.
I don't think that the reason why is that they have less complex media or there's less cognitive demands. I don't think that's even the reason at all. I think that a lot of these people just don't even care about it in the first place. Also, the way that you measured something 100 years ago is totally different foundation than the way that you would do it now. Tall people die sooner. At a certain amount of height, yes.
Which means IQ scores are sensitive to the environment and improve when the environment improves. Access to schooling, nutrition, healthcare, the complexities of daily life, all of these things are relevant, and none were accounted for in Lin's work. Because of course they weren't. Lin was a self-described scientific racist. His goal was to show how inferior black people were.
And that's a thing I feel like Asmongold, because of his personality and his style, kind of forgets that when people do something, there's a reason for it. In fact, no, that's a lie. He says it all the time. The reason people aren't telling you something is a reason. The reason people are telling you something that seems outlandish, that's almost unbelievable, is for a reason. So in his own worldview, I don't see why it's such a stretch for him, for someone who is documented as racist, to then do a study based on race with the perceived outcome that the non-white people or non-people who looked like him were inferior, when that is the basis of racism. Not prejudice that people always confuse, or discrimination. Racism is about a feeling of superiority based on race. So because that was his mantra, that was how he lived, the point of his study was to confirm that worldview. Therefore, that study would be tainted.
This person's arguing with me about something that's different. Now, I do think that if you controlled for every variable, here's the reality, right? Is that if you controlled for every single variable, and every variable was exactly the same, and you took 1 million people that lived in Somalia, and you took 1 million people that lived in China, and you judged their IQ, would they both have the same IQ? Everybody knows the answer to this. Everybody knows.
Now, see, Asmon, this is why people are calling you a grifter. You don't believe you're a grifter, and personally, I don't believe you're a grifter, because I think you are who you are. But the point being is that with Somalia being at the center of things going on with Minnesota, that you're just latching on to this kind of idea of a culture and a society. But you know that you just did a false equivalency. The people of Somalia are very different than the people of China, but this would be more equivalent to being 1 million people in China versus 1 million people in Japan. Take two cultures or two different civilizations or societies that are reasonably at the same economic and social and industrial level, and you will see similarities across the board, because that's what matters, the environment, not the culture.
For overstating the heritability of IQ across groups and for downplaying environmental variables, treating socially constructed racial categories as biological truth. Richard Lin was one of the primary scholars who compiled and popularized cross-national IQ datasets.
Here's what I think also, because this is just like more bullshit. I think that what you should do is you should do more research into this and figure it out yourself. Go over there and test these people for IQ. Test people that came over here that don't have these same problems, and then see what their IQs are. There's a reason why we don't do a lot of research on this. And the reason why people don't do research on this is because they're afraid of the answer. That's the reason why. And I want to go back to what I've said before, is that look at the people that are advocating for more information versus look at the people that are advocating for less information. I'm confident that I think that more research and more investigation into this will lead to the obvious outcome. But for some people, they don't even want to talk about it. They don't even want to look into it. And that's the real problem. And they don't want to do that because what they've built onto it is they built an entire ideology of the blank slate. The blank slate doesn't exist. The blank slate is to a degree true, but there are also a lot of things about it that are not true. And so what happens is that you have people that have this entire ideology that's built around this lie, and because of that, they try to never talk about or never discuss any difference besides this.
Now, it's ironic for you to say that, he should be doing more research, but you purposely say all the time, you don't do any research. You don't look into any studies. You don't believe in, quote, research data. You said yourself, I believe in common sense and just it makes sense to me. So why are you putting the burden of proof and the burden of effort on the Birdman for doing more research when he's already shown that he's done his research with citations and you have no research? You have no citing. You're just going with your gut, which is your brand, understandable. But right now, Birdman's got you beat when it comes to sources and reputable data.
Anyway, those datasets compiled by Lin were later cited approvingly by the bell curve authors Murray and Herrnstein. In fact, Murray has explicitly acknowledged Lin's work as part of the research base for their claims about group IQ differences. The problem is not simply that Lin held extreme views, including open support for eugenics, but that his data practices have been widely criticized for flaws in its methodology. Upon reviewing Lin's work, Witchert states the following: the assertion that the average IQ of Africans is below 70 is not tenable, even under the most lenient of inclusion criteria. Because Lin missed a sizable portion of the relevant literature, their estimate of average IQ of Africans is clearly too low. Combined, the current systematic review and the results of our review of Raven's test suggests that the average IQ of African test takers is close to 80. We believe that the accuracy of estimates of national IQ of sub-Saharan African countries can be improved considerably. What Witchertz is saying here is that Lin conducted bad science and that the average estimated IQ of poverty-stricken African people is actually close to average, which is usually defined as between 85 to 115. If their environment improves, so too with their average IQ scores due to the Flynn effect.
And the problem here we're going to run into, as you'll see what Asmon's response is, that even when you give someone concrete, documented data and evidence that supports something that goes against their worldview, because they are entrenched in an ideology, entrenched in being on a side, that they will not concede the most basic of points. This is factually confirmed, factually shown by the Birdman, who gives you all the citations you could possibly need to do your own research or just Google it to see if he's right. And what does Asmon say?
Effect. And remember,
Surely.
We are talking about countries that have faced civil war, famine, disrupted schooling, disease.
Civil war, famine, disruptive schooling, disease. Okay, these seem all great reasons to bring these people into America. This is such a great list of reasons why these people should come to our country. Yeah, I mean now, like guys, I wasn't convinced. Now I'm totally convinced. Now they should be here for sure.
And extreme poverty, not to mention constant exploitation by Western countries that literally...
That's right. It's Western countries' fault why these countries are shitholes. And that's the reason why, for example, whenever Britain invaded China and forced them to, buy tea and stuff like that, and they colonized India, that's why there's no smart people and people successful in China and India. That's the exact reason. Because, see, like, every country that, Europeans colonized is now just totally fucking famine-stricken and terrible. Like China, for example. It's just...
Asmon, you literally did not pass history class. I don't know what to tell you there. There is no timeline where China was ever controlled by a European power. Yes, there was trade, Cheap East India Company, and a few other things that happened over the course of history. But ever once did imperialism, colonization, reach China. That's just factually incorrect. Africa was the hub of colonialism, was the hub of imperialism because of its raw resources that existed on that continent. So, in comparison to other colonies or cultures that were affected by European imperialism, which includes Haiti, the Bahamas, the Aztecs, the Incas, throughout even the Americas, they did not have to deal with the same level of severity that Africa did. That's just basic history, and I know you clearly did not study it, because there's no way you just said with a straight face that, oh, it's just Western culture's fault, or, every country that was imperialized got through the exact same thing and should be as good as they are today. That's just factually incorrect. The sheer number of countries that were in Africa over centuries is so much more different than when it comes to Latin America, America, or even India today.
The phone you're watching this video on contains cobalt, a chemical element that is abundant in the Congo. This element is mined using child labor in the Congo, and not only does this mining degrade the environment and pollute the local water system, it results in birth defects of the children born there as they have high levels of cobalt and uranium in their blood. In 1996, the American Psychological Association's Task Force on Intelligence explicitly warned that environmental factors such as education, nutrition, and health significantly influence IQ test performance. If you ignore those variables and jump straight to biology, well, you're not following the science.
And that ultimately is kind of the downfall of Asmongold in this video response. Because people will say that Asmon's literally winning based on views, but in terms of actually breaking down what is being said between both of them, Birdman is winning hands down when it comes to facts and logic and citations and science, because ultimately he is not just using race. And even Asmongold himself said that race is not the biggest factor. It's not even, he said it might be fifth or sixth, but when it comes to the comparison points, he always defaults back to race. Not saying he's racist. I'm saying his main criteria, the differences in which he's drawing, are always tied to the racial element. He is not being racist, but he's using racial ideology to back up his claims. And that makes sense because the study that is the foundation of his point was based behind that.
It results in birth defects of the children born there.
So why would you want to bring a bunch of defective kids into America? Why would you want to do that? It's stupid. Like, you're making my argument.
Come on, Zach. Have a little bit of reading comprehension. He's not making your argument. He's bringing out the point that better health care, a better environment, and these kids and their IQs and their capabilities will greatly increase because they're in a better environment. Come on, man, keep up.
6, the American Psychological Association's Task Force on Intelligence explicitly warned that environmental factors such as education, nutrition, and health significantly influence IQ test performance.
Why do they keep warning and not researching?
Asmongold, this is the research. This is what you're asking for. He's giving it to you. It's not just talk. It is research.
There's never any data analysis.
Zach, he literally showed you charts. Charts are data. Graphs are data. Percentages are data. Those are the numbers you're looking for. He provided that in the video you're reacting to.
Don't you find that to be interesting? What are the odds of that?
If you ignore those variables and jump straight to biology, well, you're not following the science.
They're all variables.
If the variables, that means they're part of the data set, that means they're part of the research. I'm very confused how he just got lost with his own point. But let's continue. Let's see how this ends. Because the video, again, Birdman's video is only 10 minutes, but Asmongold managed to make this video like an hour almost.
So this brings us back to Zach's tweet. Yes, this claim is racist because it was made by a racist whose entire purpose was to denigrate an entire continent to uphold white supremacist narratives like eugenics. The claim wasn't a fact because facts survive scrutiny. They don't collapse the moment you ask who collected the data and whether other researchers could replicate those results. If your worldview requires Somalia or any other African country to be permanently capped at 68 IQ in order to make sense, then the science wasn't the point. The conclusion is, and that, ironically, is narrative pushing.
So what Birdman finished off by saying is, if you are going to take any study, research, or any talking point and ignore the methodology behind it, then you're not looking for truth. You're not looking for confirmation. You're looking for narrative. You're looking to support whatever ideology that you're trying to peddle. And ultimately, that's what Asmongold does, kind of as a byproduct. Because like I said, he's not a grifter. He's not a grifter in my mind. He is just a common sense dude who does little to no actual research. But when other people do research, he has the audacity to challenge it. So let's see what his clothing remarks are.
Well, no, why are other researchers not replicating these results on a regular basis? Why is this not happening? Why is it that we're talking about researchers replicating results. Why is it that none of these researchers are doing this on a regular basis? Why is it that this outcome isn't able to be reproduced through science? It's because they're afraid to do so.
No, Zach, the problem is that you're ignoring the time it takes to gather the information, to study the effects of IQ over a population. It's not something that can be done in a short time, not even 5, 10. It takes decades to see the adverse effects generation after generation. You can't just ask for that information right then and there, because that's how you collect data, the thing you keep asking for, which the charts already showed.
Then the science wasn't the point.
Yes.
The conclusion is.
Yes.
And that,
well, the
ironic,
conclusion is the point, actually. Like, if there's a country that has an IQ of 68 average, or let's say it's 80 on average, let's assume it's 85. Do I want to bring a bunch of median level, average 85 IQ people into the country? No, it's because these people are like an entire almost standard deviation below the average, and I think that their functional value in society is going to be minimal. That's the reason why.
Credit where credit's due. The average IQ in America is higher, but that's because we're a better country, not because of Africa and African people. We're just a better country, so our IQ is higher.
Man, that's sad. Wow, mic drops, I know. So basically, this guy spent his entire video calling me racist, and then when he finally showed the data still showed the exact same thing that I was saying, but he said it was a different number. If you think that there's no difference between somebody with a 100 IQ and a 100 and an 80 IQ, you probably have an 80 IQ. I'm sorry, but there's a reason why the military doesn't let people in with that level of an IQ. It's because they're functionally fucking useless and they're stupid. And the fact is that you don't want to bring any of those people. This guy's a
So again, the point here is that Asmongold is saying that anyone from those countries, specifically Somalia, because of historical reasons, backed by science, backed by history, backed by tangible proof, we don't want those people here because their environment has made them just permanently tainted. Not even factoring in the idea that being in America could improve their overall quality. Like just a generation, maybe two, could lead to better quality of Somalian immigrants who will be Somali Americans. It's almost like that's how time works and how the progress of your nation affects everyone within it. So ultimately, what do we make of this engagement, really? What do we make of these two and their arguments? And I would say, I made a good point of making sure that I gave credit where credit was due when it comes to Asmongold's stances, and I made sure to highlight Birdman's logic and where he's coming from. And ultimately, the only way you really pick a side on this is if you are inherently biased to one or the other. And my uniqueness of this channel and who I am is that I like both these people. I subscribe to both of them. And I would say, when I look at this, we have two different worldviews, but the problem is that the worldviews are clouding science. Birdman is speaking from a place of scientific background, scientific literacy, and Asmongold speaking from a worldview of the guy next door who just hears about stuff, does no research, just kind of goes with his gut. And there's nothing inherently wrong with going with your gut. The problem is when your gut is proven wrong and you double down. And even in this video, as we highlighted multiple times, he saw that it wasn't a race-based thing, that race is not a contributing factor, but ignored the fact that the person who made this was focusing on race. If you were to take the same kind of study, but have it focused on social, economic, and progress and technology, and they come to the same results, like you said earlier, Asmon, would people really talk about it? Yes, people talk about it all the time in America when it comes to social economic status affecting the quality of life for Americans. Your environment ultimately affects the upbringing you, your children, and your families can have. That is not a racial thing. That's an economic thing. And what comes to that, you always follow the money. So when it comes to Somalians and any African country, nationality, we want to explain it any other way, there are going to be drawbacks because they're from a society that was literally handicapped by 2/3 of the world for hundreds of years. And that takes a toll. We even see it in America with black people. Black people were enslaved for the time of this nation's existence. 2/3 of it. 2/3. And we saw what kind of damage that did. And a great point of contention could be, look at Chinese immigrants. They were literally excluded from the country and then be able to bring back. And in that time between them coming in and out of the country, black people still were slaves and then not slaves. So they never had to go through the same level of trauma, the same level of being held back by slavery, to why they have an improved society, an improved quality of life than African Americans to this day. Because their environment, even in the same country, their environments were different. So, ultimately speaking, at the end of the day, Birdman is going to be right to you if you believe in science and documentation. Asmongold is going to be right to you if you believe in not science, but believe in your gut, or believe in your disposition that some people are just inherently weaker, inherently less intelligent, and inherently not deserving, as he said, of a blank slate. Which, to be fair, as I always try to be, no one is a blank slate, no one is the same, we're not all created equal, but to mistreat others for the sake of their environment, that's just something. I can't call it racist, but I say it's improper. There's not a term for it. This has been me, the Autistic Review. Who do you think won? Signing off.